The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, what exactly do your property taxes pay for? Then, Mayor Stephen Del Duca stops by to discuss the City of Vaughan's new approach to reducing the cost of housing. That's ahead on the agenda. Municipal budget season in Ontario is coming to an end, and if there's one major takeaway from all these proposals and deliberations, it's that property taxes everywhere are going up in 2025. But the rate of the increase is much steeper in some places than in others. Why is that? And how exactly are these billions of dollars collected by cities and towns being spent? Here to help us understand better where your property tax dollars are going, we're joined by Lindsay Jones, Director of Policy at AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Enid Slack, Director of the Institute on Municipal Finance and Governance at the U of T School of Cities. Rory Nissan, Deputy Mayor for the City of Burlington and Chair of the Ontario Caucus of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And Benjamin Dacus, Vice President of Research and Outreach for Clean Prosperity. He's a former Director of Policy, Budget and Fiscal Planning in the Office of the Premier of Ontario, and it's great to have you four around our table here for a very timely discussion. Lindsay, let's get you to start us off here. Property taxes are going up in 2025. Give us some of the reasons why that's happening.
Absolutely. So 3 reasons. We've got inflation, we've got growth and related infrastructure costs, and we've got the growing social challenges that municipalities are being asked to take on in a way that, particularly in Ontario, is not consistent with the overall role of municipalities.
Is that what it looks like in Burlington?
Oh, absolutely. Not just in Burlington, but really across the province and the country, we're seeing taxes go up. We're up 5.82% in Burlington, but it's going up every year. 30% is the increase in the cost of doing these infrastructure projects. Those are labor costs and those are capital costs, just buying the material. 30% inflation is a lot, and we were already stressed to start with.
Enid, let me get you in here to talk about how you think the pandemic has hurt municipal balance sheets.
Well, I think the pandemic, when it was in full force, meant, particularly for larger municipalities, their transit systems were, ridership went down by 80 to 90%. That meant their transit fare revenues went down by 80 to 90%. And that was the biggest hit, I think, for the larger cities. But there were also expenditures on public health and on, masking and a whole lot of other things to do with the pandemic. But, I think that's less of an impact now.
So they've recovered from much, they've come back from much of that, you think?
I think so, but I think cities are facing other challenges. We've talked a bit about infrastructure. There's an infrastructure deficit. We're seeing water pipes break. We saw this in Montreal. We saw this in Calgary. There's billions of dollars needed to bring infrastructure into a state of good repair. We've got new things like cyber attacks. So municipalities, we had the Toronto Library was hacked. The city of St. John and Hamilton, they were hacked. So cities have to prepare for preventing these attacks or responding to these attacks.
Ben, cities and towns are always looking for other sources of revenue besides the property tax base. Like what? Where else can they get money from?
Yeah, so the property tax is really the revenue source of last resort for a lot of cities. They know that the headline for every budget is going to be what's the property tax increase in that year. So they're going to first start with what do they have to spend their money on? That's what we should be focusing first. What are the cities spending their money on? Whether it's on support for homelessness programs, growth-related infrastructure. That's what we have to be really focused on, and then we can talk about what the right way of financing that growth is, or that those services are, be they property taxes, development charges, user fees, grants from other levels of government. So let's separate the conversation. Let's talk about what cities should be spending money on. Then we can talk about how to make sure that we're financing that in the most affordable and effective way.
And Steve, cities, municipalities, they cover everything you do, right? When you get up in the morning, what's the first thing you do? You plant your feet on the floor. Well, the municipality has enforced the building code to make sure you don't fall through the floor. Then you go to the bathroom, skip that part, but you flush the toilet, okay? That is the municipality. You flip the light on, you brush your teeth in clean water, all municipalities. Then you go to work, maybe you drive on a municipal road, maybe you take the public transit. When you're in trouble, when you need help, you need fire, you need paramedics, you need police, it's all municipal.
But when we talk about, Lindsay, what you spend money on, I don't know what it's like at City Hall, but at Queen's Park, 75 to 80% of it is on salaries of employees, of people who work for the province. Is it that way at City Hall as well?
It's, the two main drivers when we look at inflation in terms of the increases and the pressure on the property tax is both the cost of infrastructure, so Rory's talked about that already, but also wages. So when you think about police officers or the nurses who are working in long-term care homes or bylaw officers, firefighters, these are all folks who are funded at the municipal level. And what we're seeing right now, of course, is a wave of bargaining agreements that is now reflecting the historic inflation that took place in 2022.
Gotcha. How about, can you make a comparison between what we sort of pay in property taxes in the province of Ontario relative to other provinces as well?
Well, the property tax is the main source of revenue for local governments across Canada. It's maybe 40% of municipal revenues in Ontario, maybe 45%.
We got a chart later, almost half.
Okay, almost half. It's a higher percentage in some provinces. It's a lower percentage in other provinces. It really depends on what sources of revenues municipalities are depending on more heavily. So there's user fees. So in British Columbia, municipalities depend more on user fees than they do in Ontario. So there's differences across the country, but the property tax is the main source of revenue. And that goes back to you like history, it goes back to the Baldwin Act of 1849, right? That set up the municipal finance system in this country when municipalities were doing roads and water. And they had property taxes, user fees, and transfers. And we kind of have the same revenue sources today. There's a few more. But you heard Rory talk about all the different expenditures that municipalities are making. And the question, as Ben raised, should that all be on the property tax?
I knew we were going to get into the weeds today, but I confess I did not expect the Baldwin Act of 1849 to come up.
My question is, were bicycles even invented at that point?
Maybe not. We got a chart we want to show here because, of course, depending on where you are, your property taxes is going to be either higher or lower than some. Okay, Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up here? We've been so accustomed to seeing property taxes held to the rate of inflation, and when inflation is running at 2-3%, that's not too bad. These are bigger numbers here. Let's bring this graphic up here. Property taxes rising faster in some places. This is for 2025. Kawartha Lakes is up there at 6.2% increase for the year. Waterloo, 6.34%. London, 7.4%. Oshawa, 7.87%. Milton, almost 10%. We just learned today that the City of Toronto has come out with a 6.9% proposed property tax increase. 6.9%. That is a larger number than we are accustomed to seeing. Okay. Well, Rory, let's start with you. As you look at these numbers, how do they strike you?
Well, it's concerning for myself as a homeowner and a taxpayer. There's great affordability challenges right now. People are going to food banks more than ever, including in Burlington. But it really speaks to the need for new ways to fund municipalities. That's exactly what the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is calling for, a new municipal growth framework. It's because you'll see the province, and Lindsay can speak to that, but the federal government as well, they have increased revenues because GDP is actually going up. And we don't see that. So the population grows, and we think that our financing should grow with it, as with the GDP. So that's the solution that FCM has come up with, and I think it's a smart one.
We'll talk about that more in a little bit, but Lindsay, I want to find out from you. Again, after years of looking at 2 and 3s and 2s and 3s, and now suddenly we're at 6s and 7s and 8s and 9s, bit of sticker shock going on out there?
Absolutely. And I think what we're seeing is municipalities really bearing the brunt of investments that, in fact, should be made at the provincial level. In Ontario in particular, municipalities are responsible for a variety of health and social costs that everywhere else in the country are the responsibility of provincial governments.
Like what?
So social housing is a big one, but also public health, land ambulance, long-term care, social services. So all of these services that are really critical to Ontarians' quality of life, but that really don't belong on the property tax base.
I guess the key, Ben, is if some of those services were uploaded to the provincial or federal levels of government, would these kinds of increases not necessarily be happening at the municipal level?
I wouldn't jump to uploading because what that does is we skip that first step. We've skipped the first step of what are we spending our money on, and where does it make the most sense to spend that money. Let's really understand kind of how we got to the world of 2s and 3s and the percentage increases of property taxes. One of the ways that cities did that was by taking some of the growth-related infrastructure costs and obviously focusing on affordability for property taxes, which makes perfect sense as a councillor. Those are your existing voters. But what they've been doing over the last couple of years is creating or being one of the largest causes of another affordability crisis for homeowners, for home buyers, when it comes to these really dramatic increases in development charges, upfront charges on home buyers that has been a key cause of the housing affordability crisis. That's what we should be focused on.
Rory, how much as a municipal politician do you think about or worry about raising the property tax rates too high to the point where some people may think, I got to sell my house because I can't afford to pay these property taxes anymore?
Sure. I mean, that's when you need to have programs to help those people in need. So in Halton Region, a low-income senior can defer their property taxes for as long as they're living in that home. So we do have measures that we take to support those most in need. And it's a valid point, but at the same time, the municipality delivers so much affordability for our community by having libraries available to them, by having public transit, and we have free public transit in Burlington for seniors and low-income people, that we're between a rock and a hard place here. There's no doubt.
And Steve, I just wanted to jump in as well. I think that the reality with the property tax base is that it's not a progressive tax. So it really doesn't take into consideration the ability of people like seniors on fixed income or struggling small businesses to actually pay for the services that in Ontario can be largely really about income redistribution, like social housing.
Can I do a little follow-up on that? Only in as much as I've heard this argument before, but richer people tend to live in bigger houses that pay more property taxes than lower income people. So in that respect, it is kind of progressive, isn't it?
It's spend more, spend more than the more that you pay in your property tax. But the income tax is more progressive in that the rate that you pay goes up depending on how much income you make, right? Your rate goes up as you make more. That doesn't happen with property taxes. So we can have people in very large homes that maybe pay 2-3 times what the average person pays, but that's not like their income tax, that's for sure.
Right. The mill rate does go up the same for everybody regardless of income.
You got
that
it.
is fair.
But I think you're generally right. Richer people live in more expensive houses. There are exceptions, like Rory's mentioned, seniors on fixed incomes who bought their houses a long time ago. They've gone way up in value. The property tax has gone up, but there are programs for people in that situation. But I think the property tax isn't as regressive as some people think. But even so, the income tax is more progressive.
It is.
So if we're talking about social services, that's more appropriate.
Ben, how much of these numbers here that we're seeing, the 6, the 7, the 8, the 9%, almost 10% increase in Milton, how much of that is, do you think, because these municipalities are trying to catch up from prior commitments that they've made in past years and the chickens are coming home to roost?
Yeah, I think that's a question to ask them, for local residents to ask their councillors to be able to understand their budgets. And budgets are a tricky thing for a regular citizen to understand. Every city is different, and I wish them luck to be able to unpack what their budget is and what the even bottom line number is. It's always been something that's tricky to figure out.
So Milton is one of the fastest growing municipalities in all of Canada.
Yeah.
And they have some of the highest tax increases, the highest on your chart. Why is that? It's because the DCs are not covering the growth.
Development charges.
The development charges are simply not covering the growth. DCs are a really interesting topic from sort of a theoretical point of view, but the money does have to come from somewhere, Right now, it's coming from the property taxes. That's why a new growth framework is so important, Steve.
I want to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up this next quote here. This is from the mayor of Oshawa, Dan Carter, who has been quite front and center lately on a range of issues, got a lot of attention for his municipality. This is from a press release that accompanied the approval of Oshawa's budget, including the property tax increase, and here's what he had to say. The mayor of Oshawa says, without a doubt, this was one of the hardest budget processes I've encountered in the last 10 years. Oshawa, like other municipalities, is feeling the impact of downloading from other levels of government while facing historic economic challenges such as aging infrastructure, record high inflation, supply chain disruptions, and more. Let's talk inflation here. Lindsay, how does that eat away at a municipality's budget?
Well, so in two primary ways. In particular, the cost of construction has really ballooned over the past 10 years. It's increased by, I think it's around 70%. And in a situation where we're trying to grow, we're trying to build more houses, we're trying to replace the aging infrastructure that municipalities have had in place for a variety of years, and we're trying to adapt to climate change, that's really significant. The second area, of course, is wages. We're seeing this a lot, in particular as it relates to police services. There's significant wage growth there, but really across the board as wages catch up with the inflation that has been experienced over the past few years.
Do you know what the settlement was for the last police contract in Halton?
Oh, it was quite significant, and it drove an increase of over 12% for the police budget in Halton region. So it was a big part of that. And we chose in the end to make it even higher, to have more police on the ground supporting our communities. So there's no doubt the labor cost, police budget, firefighters, it all adds up.
I see this all across the province, whether you have your own police service, as you do in Halton region, or whether you don't and have to use the Ontario Provincial Police. The settlements are significant and sometimes well above inflation. How are municipalities expected to pay those?
That's it. There's only one way: increase property taxes.
And this is why, particularly in Ontario, you know, we look at police services or infrastructure as really core municipal responsibilities where the property tax base is supposed to pay. But we can't fulfill those responsibilities if in fact we are diverting, and at last count in Ontario, it's $5 billion towards services like social housing or long-term care or public health that really belong more appropriately at the provincial level.
Even when they go to binding arbitration, Ben, I've seen this as well, municipalities have knocked on the door of the Premier of Ontario and said, look, we followed the process. The police, the OPP, are going to get a significant salary increase, not saying whether they deserve it or don't, that's not the issue. The issue is the municipality has to pay it, and they don't know how.
Yeah.
What's the solution there?
We're kind of right now in the worst of both worlds scenario, where there's blurred accountability, where cities are going to constantly be saying, well, we have to pay a portion of these social services, whether it's ambulances or social assistance, and people don't really know who's accountable. Is the Premier and the province responsible for paying more? Are cities, there should be talking about cities, our local councillors, about getting spending under control. People don't know who to go to. And so, the framework right now is the cities don't have the right tools to finance this. So we have to have a proper conversation about that first question of who's doing what is the most appropriate place for control of spending, and then accountability, and then matching the revenues. That's what we have to start with, and then we can get to the conversation of, well, is a transfer the right approach? Should the province take these on? That's what we have to think through first for core municipal services. That's a separate conversation than the infrastructure, the growth-related costs that we've been talking about.
You got a view on how that should work?
Well, I would underscore what Ben said. I've been saying it for a long time. The first question is, what should municipalities be doing? They are doing so many things. Should they be delivering and paying for social services? Should they be doing policing? Should they be doing parks and libraries? And, you know, the answers to some of those are really easy. Some of them are more difficult. But that's the starting point. What should municipalities be in the business of doing? Then you figure out how to pay for it. So if we think they should be doing social services, delivering social services, the property tax is not the way to do that. You would have to say, something like an income tax, maybe a sales tax. Or maybe the province should be doing these things. But the first point is, who should be doing it? And I'd bring the federal government in there too. Who should be doing immigration settlement, for example? Should that be a municipal function, provincial, federal? Who should be doing what? And then the question is, what goes on the property tax? What other taxes do municipalities need?
Tell me one thing Burlington or Halton is dealing with right now that you have to pay for, that when you look at your budget you say, ain't no way we ought to be in charge of that.
Sure. I mean, region of Halton is covering an incredible amount for homelessness at this point, in the millions of dollars, just to make sure that every homeless person in Halton region has a place to stay, which we actually do have. So we actually meet the threshold criteria of having somewhere for everyone, but it's very costly to our residents and it goes on their tax bill. In fact, Halton region, this is why I'm not so worried about downloading versus uploading, Steve, or who does what. I mean, it's many pockets, same pair of jeans. And the key is that the money comes from somewhere and it comes from the appropriate place. So based on Ontario's own commitments, they're going to owe Halton region over $35 million in 2025. And for all of the things, commitments that they said that they would cover for us, things like social programming, housing, homelessness, paying for the cost of growth, all of that adds up to over $35 million in 2025.
And I mean, and that's not unique to Halton in Ontario. Last week, AMO released a study looking at homelessness in Ontario, and a part of that was also who's paying for it. And what we saw was that municipalities are really stepping in to do their part, and the provincial government is missing in action.
Time for another chart. Okay, Sheldon, here we go. Let's do the chart here, atop of page, just above question 14, where Ontario municipal revenue comes from. And this circles back to what Enid was saying just a little while ago. Property taxes, look at that, almost $27 billion in property taxes are collected, which is half of where municipalities get their money, 50.9%. Go to the bottom left of that chart, user fees, from conservation areas, that type of thing. $12.4 billion worth of revenues on that. That's about a quarter. And then this whole thing, other, almost $14 billion or a quarter of the revenue stream as well from other things. Lindsay, what does that mean? What's other?
Well, other
transfers.
It includes both federal and provincial transfers, but also in there is DC's, development charges. Obviously a hot topic over the past couple of years. But when we look at the DC question, we did a calculation, and for Ontario to make up the revenues in property taxes that we charged in DC's last year, the revenues from property taxes would have to increase by 20%.
Well, that's not on, obviously.
Well, we don't think so.
Right.
But there are other solutions.
Go ahead.
There are lots of other solutions. So these upfront charges that municipalities in Ontario charge are way out of line compared to the rest of Canada. Let's just take one individual item. Water and wastewater services in Peel Region. That's a $55,000 upfront charge on a single detached home. You've got Mayor Del Duca coming on the program today as well, talking about the charges that they're total between mostly municipal, lower tier, upper tier, and some provincial charges, upwards of nearly $200,000 for a single detached home. Now, we've seen a significant reduction in those from the mayor, but now we get to the question of, well, if they can just cut these development charges at the stroke of a pen, how strong is the argument behind these amounts?
That's a great point, Ben. And no development charges should be, struck with a pen. In Burlington, we have over 100-page analysis of development charges, and we were able to bring down development charges in Burlington. But we did it because we realized we couldn't do a couple big projects, bridges over the QEW, because there wasn't upper-level funding for them. So having recognized that and taken that into account over the next 10 years, we were able to reduce DCs. But I really don't support a superficial analysis of development charges. If anyone wants to go into our Watson reports to tell us where they went wrong, then we're ready to move on that.
What's a Watson report?
Oh, wow, you got to know about Watson.
It's a person.
Watson is an A-plus consultant that does our development charge
That's
reports.
not the IBM computer you're talking about here.
No, but they're like IBM in some respects.
Got it.
Yeah, very hard to break through.
Okay. Enid, if you wanted to be able to keep that property tax percentage where it is,
Right.
and you wanted to increase other, what
Right.
would you do? If you're a municipality and you're trying to
Yeah.
get more revenue from other streams as opposed to having to raise property taxes, where does the money come from?
There aren't a lot of options. There aren't a lot of options because provincial legislation prohibits municipalities from levying income taxes or sales taxes or fuel taxes or any of those things.
Hotel taxes?
Well, they can levy hotel
They
taxes.
can do that,
Yes.
okay.
Some municipalities in Ontario have hotel taxes.
Yeah.
Toronto does. I think Ottawa does. They also have vacancy taxes, vacant homes taxes. But again, the vacant homes taxes aren't designed to bring in revenue. They're designed to change people's behavior so that we don't have vacant homes. So there aren't really a whole lot of things municipalities can do in terms of other revenue sources. So they can't, for example, levy income or sales taxes.
What about municipalities just saying to their constituents, we can't do this anymore. We want to hold the line on taxes. I know you want more services, you want more skating rinks, you want more community centers. We're just not going to do them anymore because we can't afford it.
Well, that's an option. And you know, part of these increases that you showed before reflect that there were not a lot of increases in prior times. You know, when Toronto was amalgamated in 1998, there were 0% tax increases for 3 years. Not even the rate of inflation, 0. And then after that, at or below the rate of inflation. So there is a bit of catch-up here that probably resulted in some deteriorating infrastructure, and things we're paying the price for now.
This guy's got a very distressed look on his face here. What was
Steve,
that
it
about?
makes me so sad to think that we would forego having community centers for our residents, new and old, that we would no longer have enough park space for them, that our roads would deteriorate. I have a kid at home, a toddler, and I just want him to have the same quality of life in Burlington that I did. And with revenues going up for the province and the federal government, this is not beyond our reach. This is feasible. Tax increases, death and taxes, right? It's going to happen. Taxes do go up with inflation. People feel it more because they see it, and we're so transparent about it. But if your income goes up, Steve, year over year, guess what? You're paying more provincial and federal taxes. You may not notice it the same way, but that money's there, and we need to be able to access it to deliver on that quality of life. I'm not on for these 0%. That's how we got to where we are today, where we have this major infrastructure gap. And that's what we're trying to catch up on. The alternative is, not seeing the kind of Canada that I want to see.
I just wanted to add 2 points. What we hear a lot from our members about is where the provincial government either has a legislative requirement that requires municipalities to deliver services up to a certain standard, and then has a transfer that in fact does not enable municipalities to meet those
Unfunded
kinds
mandates.
of... Exactly. So you see that a lot in long-term care in particular. But even, and in policing as well, a lot of the new requirements, cost money, and that's a legal obligation of municipalities. But then also looking at things like housing targets. So provincially, there are mandated housing targets, and that requires municipalities to make these kinds of investments in infrastructure that they can no longer make with the development charge regime the way that it is.
Ben.
Yeah. So what we want to have is we want to have a balance of affordability writ large. That's affordability on property taxes and affordability for new home buyers. But we also want to have the core municipal services. So let's take the core municipal services that we've got now, and we'll call them mostly water, roads, and other like community services, libraries, that sort of thing. You can really split them into 2 categories. One is things that are user fee supported, and the other one are things that really fundamentally have to be relied on in the property paid for through property taxes. And so when it comes to the things that we support with user fees, that's mostly water and wastewater. And some, when there's municipally owned electricity corporations, they'll have an upfront charge as well in many cases for new housing construction. There are ways in which we can balance affordability for these kinds of long-term assets that have a user fee base. And what we're doing right now is instead of like what we're doing now of these big upfront charges of the $100,000 or more, what we should be doing is thinking like any household would. The way that a household balances the things in which they're going to have a long-term investment in, live in for many, many years, is a mortgage. Cities are effectively just passing debt from their books onto home buyers through these development charges, and that's that link that we need to break.
Now, cities can't, right? Unlike the provincial or federal governments, they can't run deficits, right, on the operating side.
That's only for operating.
On the
so
operating
when we
side,
talk,
right.
that's why we have to separate the operating conversation. That's like police salaries. That's that's where we have to finance it with property taxes, with the long-term infrastructure. When we talk about water, we talk about the electricity distribution assets that they own. These are long-lived assets that are going to last decades. We should be relying on debt at the municipal level or other sources of financing. But what cities have been doing instead is a perfectly sensible thing to do for them to do politically, which is the new home buyers, almost by definition, don't live in that city yet. They don't vote for a councillor. The councillors are inherently reliant on votes from existing residents. And so they're focusing on getting costs down for those residents and focus less on the long-term housing affordability question.
I actually don't know how this works. Maybe you can help me out here.
Sure.
If Burlington wants to build a new community center and it's going to cost, I don't know what, let's say $4 million. I'll pull a number out of thin air. It's going to cost $4 million to do it. Can you go to the bond markets and sell bonds to raise that money?
Oh my gosh, Steve, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Lindsay would know better than
Yeah,
us.
Lindsay, okay.
Well, you can, but only if you're operating at a scale where it makes sense. A lot of the time as well, there's a relationship between, for example, development charges. That's a stream of revenue or income that a municipality will leverage to be able to borrow money. So if there is no DC revenue coming in, being able to finance some of those projects also becomes a challenge. But yes, there are many municipalities, particularly the larger ones, do go to the markets, and they do that really effectively. The challenge is when you're looking at all of the other governments that are much smaller and that don't have the capacity to be able to do that. That's where things really become a challenge.
Well, in some provinces, though, like British Columbia, there's a municipal finance authority that borrows on behalf of the smaller municipalities. So they pool all the borrowing of the smaller places.
Do we have one of those here?
No, I don't think so.
We don't have that in Ontario.
Yeah. Well,
So that allows the smaller municipalities to take advantage of lower rates, but also lower admin costs to deal with that. But Ben is right. I mean, municipalities can borrow to pay for infrastructure. And it makes a lot of sense because if you're building a bridge that's going to be lasting for 40 years, well, then you're paying it off for 40 years. We call that intergenerational equity. You know, those who are benefiting are paying over time. And that makes a lot of sense. There are rules in Ontario and in other provinces for how much you can borrow, even for capital. But most municipalities, not all, most are well below that limit.
Do we have much of a municipal bond scene in this province?
Not much, but we should be growing it a lot. First of all, if you compare municipal bonds in Canada compared to that in the United States, it's many times the size of the United States, even well beyond the sort of 10-to-1 rule of everything in the United States being bigger. The municipal bonds in the United States have, for example, tax support from the federal government. When we think about the kind of new way in which we would think about a new financial model for municipalities, that's one place to start. Another place on the municipal bond side where we can do much more is, and this is a huge credit to AMO as well, they invited a couple of people to be a part of an expert panel. I was one of them on how to finance water and wastewater infrastructure, especially for rural municipalities that can't take out debt on their own. And one of the core recommendations of that panel is create a larger scale operation that will be totally voluntary for cities to be part of, but allow them easier access to debt markets for long-term infrastructure that should be paid for on a longer scale. The large scale is going to help, and so this was something that cities and AMO is on top of, and credit to them for thinking about a solution here.
Well, let me give the last word to AMO here, since we're down to our last minute. Lindsay, this side of the table in our discussion has made plain the need for a new deal for municipalities. Who does what? Who pays for what? How much appetite at the provincial level has there been to entertain some new ideas on that?
Well, AMO's been asking for the past 18 months for the Ontario government to sit down with municipalities to have exactly this conversation. Who does what? How can we pay for it in the most sustainable way? Because as Enid points out, there's only one taxpayer. To date, while every single opposition party leader has committed to pursuing something like this, there's been a resounding silence from the Ontario government.
And let me speculate that you don't love that.
No, AMO is going to continue to ask for this conversation. We've done this before. We've done it successfully back in 2015, where I think we ended up uploading around $2 billion annually in costs back to the province where they belong. And this is something that is going to continue to be the number one priority for Ontario municipalities going forward.
All 444 of them.
All of them.
Gotcha. Well, I know a lot more about this now, 34 minutes later, than I did before, so thanks a lot, everybody, for coming in and helping us out with this. Rory Nissan, Deputy Mayor for Burlington, Lindsay Jones from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, Enid Slack from the University of Toronto, Ben Dacus, Clean Prosperity. Great to have all of you at TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
The cost of housing, particularly in the Greater Toronto Area, is one of our most persistent problems. Governments have employed a lot of strategies to get the prices down, and yet they remain stubbornly high. The City of Vaughan in York Region recently announced a new approach, and the city's mayor, Stephen Del Duca, joins us here in the studio for more. Great to see you again.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
We were reminiscing not a moment ago before we started about how you so enjoyed the last time you were in this studio.
It's been more than 2 years. Provincial leaders debate right here in this great studio, but it is very nice to be back talking about all things of Vaughan, which I'm very happy to talk about today.
Good. Let's get started. As you looked around this part of Ontario, where did Vaughan sit in terms of the average price of a home?
Pretty high. You know, I mean, I can't tell you exactly where it's stacked up against every other municipality, but we did some research last summer, summer of 2024, that showed us the median price of a home, roughly the average price of a home in the city of Vaughan would be about $1.3 million. And when you factor in what it would take by way of an average income to carry that kind of cost, fairly significant, far more than the average income. So a bit of a mismatch, a gap there. That's one of the reasons that we took decisive action in the city of Vaughan to try to deal with it.
How much of that $1.3 million average price would be represented by so-called development charges?
Well, at that point in time, the City of Vaughan portion was, for let's say a single detached home, City of Vaughan portion was $94,000, give or take. York Region, about, I want to say 85 to 90,000, and then the school boards, several thousand more on top of that. So before you put a shovel in the ground, somebody building a home for one of my constituents would have to pay upwards of $200,000+ to various levels of government just to get the project permitted.
And just for those who aren't completely familiar with what development charges are, tell us what they are.
Development charges are, I'll call them levies that municipalities charge. Normally when an applicant or a builder comes for a building permit, they have to pay this cost, and it's what we use in turn to pay for a lot of really important infrastructure. I want to make that clear. Development charges do help fund things like fire stations, libraries, roads, water, wastewater systems, so that, you know, when you move into a home, the toilets will literally flush and the showers will work.
It's always a good thing.
Always really important things. So development charges are necessary to fund the infrastructure that maintain the quality of life. I just know that in my city, like many other municipalities, they have risen sharply over the last number of years. And given that we do have a housing affordability crisis, I felt that we had to do something. And so we did.
So one of the things you asked your city staff to do in Vaughan was to look at what might happen if you reduce those charges.
Yeah.
What came back?
Well, what came back is that, I will tell you that what came back, of course, is always the concern that if you start to cut anticipated revenues, that you might have a bit of a challenge, I'll say, on the back end. The problem is the last couple of years in our city, and I suspect it's true in most GTA municipalities, there hasn't been a ton of new housing starting. And so one of the reasons that I was quite comfortable making this change is I told myself and I told my colleagues on council, I would much rather that we get half of something than 100% of nothing. And that was kind of the guiding philosophy, again, especially when you consider that so many people, in particular young families that are just starting out, are telling all of us in leadership positions, it's not okay that housing has become so unattainable and so expensive in the neighborhoods where they grew up. And that's what I'm trying to work on.
So if the average development charge was, for the average house, let's say almost 100 grand, what are you doing in Vaughan now on that?
So again, for that $94,000 for a low rise, like a traditional single detached home, we took it from $94,000 down to about $50,000. So we basically cut it in half.
And that kicks in as of when?
It's already kicked in. We passed the bylaw in late 2024, and so it's in effect for now.
And will last for how long?
So technically, the way that we positioned it, it's a 2-year window, although, not to go too much into the weeds here, although through the DC Act, the Development Charge Act, you can get into an agreement that helps extend the runway beyond the 2-year mark. At the same time, development charge rates get set when municipalities do, I'm going to get a bit policy wonkish here, they do something called a DC background study, then they introduce and pass a new bylaw. We weren't planning to do that work until next year, 2026, 2027. We've accelerated our timeline and we're starting that work in Vaughan this year, right now in 2025. So I want it updated across the board so we don't have to rely on a bit of a hodgepodge of policies in this regard.
What do you hope this will do?
Well, two main things. One is, because even though I said a moment ago development charges are important and they are necessary, I do think, especially in our case, and we're not the only municipality in this regard, I do think that they are, in effect, a tax that does get passed on to home buyers. And again, I want to stress in particular younger families that are just starting out. Those are the ones that I feel, I'll say, a particular degree of anguish for. You know, I'm a dad. My daughters are 17 and 13. I always kind of frame these conversations around, what do my wife and I hope for them? We tried our best to give them every single opportunity. And I don't know. Maybe my daughters will get married one day. Maybe they won't. I mean, I hope they do. Maybe they'll want to live close to home. Maybe they won't. What I believe is really important is for us to give them all of the options and opportunities that we had, that my wife had, that I had. And it feels to me like that's no longer the case. So I'm hoping, number one, the price of housing will come down because we're sending a clear market signal that it's cheaper to build. Secondly, I'm hoping we'll spur more activity so more builder developers will get shovels in the ground, which will help with the supply challenge. And I hope, again, bring prices down.
How long will it take before you know whether that's actually going to happen?
Well, I've already had conversations with significant builders and developers who operate in Vaughan. They operate in York Region. First of all, they're thrilled that we are taking this seriously because they're telling me that anytime they go to a bank or any kind of lending institution to get the financing for their project, there's literally a line item in what they're submitting to their lenders that shows what government regulations and fees like development charges cost them. So we know it's an added cost to the project. So they're happy to know that we're working really hard to bring those costs down for them so they can pass those on to the buyers themselves. I suspect we're going to start to see prices drop and activity spurred on. I'm hoping early in 2025, but this is one of those things you analyze after the fact. It's kind of hard to know real time. I can only tell you anecdotally it's gone over really, really well.
I take your point that you'd rather have 50% of something as opposed to 100% of nothing if nothing is getting built. But if this does not work as well as you hoped, you will be foregoing revenue for the Treasury, presumably. Has staff come back to you with an estimate of how much this actually could end up costing you in the end, and therefore you won't have the money for those fire halls or for those municipal pools, et cetera?
So again, hard to know in the moment because it is all based on activity and how much construction is starting, how many building permits will be getting applied for and then ultimately approved. But the other thing I didn't mention is that when we did our last development charge background study in Vaughan, which was in 2022, we notionally, in that plan, in that bylaw, we put together what we anticipated the revenue would be from development charges annually. When we did that work, we anticipated about $230, $240 million a year, give or take. What we've actually achieved, what we've actually brought in the last couple of years has been dramatically less than that. So I think when it comes to the 10-year capital plans that underpin things like development charge background studies and ultimately inform what the rates should be, there's already an awful lot of agility and nimbleness that municipal staff have to bring to bear. I am absolutely convinced that this will lead to more activity than we would have gotten in the city of Vaughan otherwise, which means to me more revenue. But even if we have to make decisions later on about the things that are fundamentally necessary for our residents, governing is about choices. It's about choosing. You know this. And for me, in terms of the policy levers at my disposal as mayor, if we're going to make housing more affordable, like if we truly believe housing affordability is a problem right now, if we believe it means that a lot of kids are thinking of moving away from the GTA, maybe even leaving Ontario, if we think it's having an impact on whether they're choosing to start families when otherwise they would make that choice, to me, there's a responsibility that every level of government has to actually marshal the forces and make the policy changes to fix the problem. So that's what we're doing in Vaughan.
I should know this, and I don't know this, and I'm embarrassed that I don't know this. But you will know this, and you're going to help me.
Well, I hope so.
Are municipalities on the same fiscal year as the province of Ontario, meaning it kicks in April 1st?
We are on, that's a great question, and I should know that, and I believe, yes, we are. So if I'm wrong about that, I'm sure my budget officer will tell me that as soon as I
think that's the case, and if it is
we
so,
are.
then you guys are in the throes right now of obviously trying to put your budget together because you're bringing it out in just a few months' time. Do you know yet what...
Well, let me go back and correct myself. We approved our budget for 2025 in December in the city of Vaughan.
Oh, okay.
So we did, yeah.
So you're there already?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea about what mill rates and or property taxes are going to have to go up to handle next year?
So we approved a budget for 2025 that would see an increase of 3% at the local level in the city of Vaughan, which is the second lowest in all of York Region. And I believe that our fiscal outlook for 2026 has us at about the same rate. We anticipate that for 2026 budget 20, but we haven't done budget 26 just yet.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is if you end up discovering that this development charge move that you've done doesn't result in more income coming in and in fact is going to end up costing you, you will have to presumably raise property taxes in order to make up the shortfall, yes?
I don't actually think so, because it goes back to what I said just a moment ago. We've actually brought in less by way of development charges the last 2-3 years because there's been less housing activity happening in the city of Vaughan. So remember, we created a background study. We had a new rate. I think it was 21 or 2022. We anticipated 240 million a year coming in from that. It's been dramatically less than that already. Our capital plan is still in place as we put it together a couple of years ago, but we've made choices and we're fortunate. We have a strong local economy in the city of Vaughan. Our revenues have been such that we've been able to keep investing in those things that our residents want to see. But I cannot tell you how many moms and dads and grandmothers and grandfathers tell me on a regular basis, where will our kids live? How are we going to afford? How are they going to afford a quality of life and a life for them that is anywhere close to what we had? And I don't like not having an answer for those residents of mine that feel that passionately that we are not passing on to our kids and grandkids a situation that is tolerable from my perspective, and I think that's a real problem.
There are 444 municipalities in Ontario.
There are.
Are any others doing this? The development charge cuts that you've implemented?
City of Burlington did this, I'll say on a smaller scale, a little bit of time ago, several months ago. And I have heard City of Toronto's done some targeted stuff. I don't know of any other municipality that's done an across-the-board change on this scale so far. I have urged my colleagues publicly to consider doing the same. I don't know that urging makes me the most popular mayor amongst his colleagues, but I do think it's really, really important for us to accept the responsibility we have. And, I know, Steve, you know this about me. I always come back to talking about my daughters, and I will just repeat kind of what I said a moment ago. We have to remember, I'm 51. I'm in that cohort of people who've created the system that we are all living in right now. And I don't want to be in a world where many, many years from now, I'm having conversations with my kids and maybe one day my grandkids, and they're all kind of wondering about, Dad or Granddad, when you had that chance to make a meaningful difference, to make things a little bit easier, to make things a little bit affordable, did you step up and do it? Or did you simply point fingers at other levels of government or other politicians or the Bank of Canada or Donald Trump or someone? Like, did you do that, or did you actually take the obligation you have and run with it? And so I believe we have that obligation. That's why I made this decision. Council supported it. And I'm hoping that it will work, and I'm hoping more municipalities take it really seriously.
If they do, Vaughan will be less special. Do you worry about that?
Vaughan will always be extremely special and unique. It's the best city in Canada, for sure.
You know, your daughters are 17 and 13, and
They
already
are.
in our conversation, you've talked about them being married off and having grandchildren.
Well,
You might want to just pump the brakes a little bit on that, Your Worship.
I said they may choose to get married, they may not. It's their choice. But I will tell you, I do feel that I have an obligation to set the table for them and all of the others like them to the extent that it's possible.
Okay, I want to take advantage of your being here to raise another issue
I
here.
knew I couldn't escape completely.
No, that's not going to happen. As we pointed out, you were here a couple of years ago. You were the Liberal leader in the Ontario general election that took place that year. You took part in a leaders' debate here. Doug Ford rather famously won that election, and you did not. And fortunately for you, the good burghers of Vaughan decided to make you their mayor just a few months later, so it kind of worked out for you. If I had told you when you were in this studio doing the leaders' debate that you and Doug Ford, who you absolutely slayed in that debate, like you were so tough on him in that debate, that you guys would go on to become pretty good working buddies, would you have believed me?
I would have been surprised. I think it's fair
You
to say.
think?
I think it's
Just
fair
surprised,
to say.
eh?
Surprised. I think that, but you know, listen, I really enjoy being mayor of my city. It's where I've lived for close to 40 years. And I think it's a great city. It's not without its challenges, but it's a great city. And when I made the decision in the summer of 2022 that I was going to seek the mayoralty, which wasn't an easy decision for me to make. I mean, we just come off a pretty tough election loss provincially, as you pointed out. Thank you for the reminder. I made that decision based on a couple of things really important to me personally. I wasn't running for mayor to try to settle old political scores. That made no sense to me, and that kind of, I'll say, negative energy or negative approach is not something that motivates me. So I wanted to do a good job for the people of the city of Vaughan, number one. Number two, it was really important to me to recognize that I was entering a new and what I'll call post-partisan phase of my career. I had been active in the Liberal Party since I was 15 years of age, and as much as I really do feel like I made a contribution to the party, I am feeling very liberated by being in that post-partisan phase.
Do you not carry a party card anymore?
I don't. I believe my party membership provincially and federally has lapsed. Yes, both. And it was also important for me to recognize my job now, my responsibility to the people of Vaughan is to work with every politician at every level, regardless of partisan stripe, to deliver for them. And I think anybody looking at my record now these last 2 and a bit years, objectively would tell you that I've done that. And part of that means working closely with Premier Ford.
Well, let me get your take on that because, of course, the mayor of Brampton is a former PC party leader. The mayor of Hamilton is a former NDP leader. The mayor of Vaughan is a former Liberal leader.
Yeah, there's a lot of us.
You know, Marianne Mead Ward in Burlington was a one-time Liberal candidate. So is it genuinely the fact that once you turn your back on partisan politics and take on these new roles in municipal affairs, that party stripe stuff really does stay at the door?
I think it seems like it's true to me. I think that's the way it should be. I will tell you, if I'm being really, really transparent about this, I think those first few months after I became mayor, there was a healthy dose of skepticism and concern in the city of Vaughan about whether I could leave the partisanship at the door. I think people were nervous about that because they recognized you need to have that good working relationship, certainly with Queen's Park if you're a mayor of a major city. But again, I think objectively I've proven to the people of Vaughan that to me this is about them, not about settling old scores, not about partisan politics. And I feel liberated by it because it means that I can make decisions based on my personal values and not necessarily getting stuck in what you need to manage when you are leading a political party that has diverse views.
Well, when the Premier visited Vaughan to do a little photo op with you, a little press conference, he always likes to have fun, sometimes at your expense.
He does, yeah.
We happen to have a little clip of that right
Shocking.
here. Sheldon, if you would, please.
But the mayor and I got together shortly after the provincial election, and I'm not blowing smoke here, Mayor. I told you, one of the best guys to deal with out of all the mayors I've ever worked with. He just believes in getting it done. He believes in supporting the people of Vaughan, and that's where we share the same philosophies. And it's great to see you again, Mayor, and you got to come over for breakfast pretty soon one more time. Have you ever seen Stephen and I at a box of Tim Horton donuts? They're done, I'll tell you.
He's said on many occasions that you've come over to his home
Yes.
in Etobicoke,
Yes.
crushed a box of cannolis, I think is the way he puts it.
He does put it that way.
Yeah,
yes.
this really happens.
I have had the chance to meet directly with the Premier at his home. I'm not the only one who certainly has. You know what I'll say about Doug Ford, and I've said this publicly before, including I think that day when we made that he made that announcement. He is the most accessible senior political leader that I have ever encountered, that I've ever seen. Again, regardless of level of government or partisan stripe, this story that he tells about call or text, and he gives out a cell number, it's not fake. It is genuine. He is extremely accessible. It doesn't mean we agree on every single issue, but he's been very, very kind to me and to the people of Vaughan over the last couple of years. And I believe he genuinely does want to get things done, and that's certainly my motivator as well.
If you were advising
Smashing
him,
cannolis and donuts,
Well-
I mean, you know, we both enjoy our sweets. You know, we both
No
enjoy
kidding.
our sweets.
If you had to advise him on whether to call an election this year as opposed to waiting for 2026, what would you tell him?
I would tell him I'm really happy that that's not my decision to make. These are tumultuous times in our country, and I think what people want to see is very strong and stable leadership. I think that there's grave concern, understandably, given what's happening in Ottawa right now as we're heading into the second Donald Trump presidency and the tariff threat. I think there's grave concern. Even in Vaughan's case, our economy is largely underpinned by manufacturing and auto manufacturing. It's a big concern for all of us. I think we want to see strong leadership. And I never think it's a bad thing to have a conversation, as others have said, with the people that you are trying to represent, especially during unprecedented times. But you also have to be a little bit careful. So, yeah. But I'm glad it's not my decision.
Dalton McGuinty once said the best advice he ever got in politics was on a sign on the steps going into Queen's Park, and that sign said, "Watch your step." Right on. That's Stephen Del Duca. He's the mayor of Vaughan, and we thank him for making the long drive into the center of Toronto today for this interview. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Monday, January 13th, 2025. Tomorrow on the program, we'll hear from retiring New Democrat MP Charlie Angus and his parting thoughts during a tumultuous time in Canadian politics. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.